To let you know about and share with you before Glenn comes up here. So ushers, as we get started, you guys can go ahead and come down and get ready to take the offering. You hopefully received or have in your vicinity a blue card. If you are a visitor, a first or second time visitor, we'd love to have you fill those out. They tell us a little bit about who's visiting us, who you are, lets us get to know you if you need any more information. And so go ahead and fill those out. And when the offering plate comes by, if you could just put that in the offering plate as well, that would be great. We'd love to get to know who you are and all that good stuff. We also, this is going to be our offering time, and so I just, on behalf of everybody who works here and all the people who attend this church, I just want to thank you all who regularly give and make doing ministry and make living out what being the church can be here at Cassis possible. And I want to invite everybody to join us in that and continue to give and be a part of contributing to not just this church, but to the ministry that the church does, and the making not just of our community a better place, but the community outside our walls a better place, and our world a better place. So it's a humbling and honoring thing to be able to attend church with people like you. So let's say a prayer real quick, and then we will continue. Dear God, thank you for just the blessing that it is to walk with you. We ask that you take these gifts that are about to come your way and turn them into glorious, wonderful things, and allow us not simply to be a community that sits back and cares for each other, but also as a community that is known in the community at large. Make the neighborhoods and the city around us a better place because we were there. We ask that you take what we give and make it into something glorious. In your name, amen. So yes, you can go ahead and start that. Now, here is a couple other things. You may notice we have this fancy connection room over there. If you are a first or second time guest, I want to invite you to come back to our 10-minute party when the service is over. Glenn will be back there, Andy will be back there, myself will be back there. And so if you would just want to meet some of the people that you see on a weekly basis here up on stage and get a chance to say hi and talk to us, we'd love to do that. If you have some questions or just give us an opportunity to get to know you all, join us after the service right through those doors over there for our 10-minute party. Now, this is the part that I'm truly excited about this morning, because we are kicking off a brand new series this morning called Come As You Are. And it is a series that Glenn and Ryan and myself, we've been really thinking about and chewing on and praying about and working on for the past couple months. And it's this wonderful series that really explores the idea of the fact, God, we know that God embraces and handles and loves our obedience and our morals and our kindness and our compassion. But there are often times where even though we may know that we shouldn't think this way, we kind of wonder, can God deal with all the baggage that I bring? Do I have to kind of clean up the baggage of my life before I can start to really embrace and follow and approach God? Things like my fears or my anxiety or my disappointments in life and in God himself, my doubts, or even the desires that I have in life. Can God handle all of that? Will he accept me with all of that? And this series, this Come As You Are series, is one that explores, well, maybe there's a different way to look at it. Maybe, in fact, I'm a father. My son, my 3-year-old son, Max, is just a wonderful young man. But I truly got a firsthand experience of what this series is going to be like this past weekend. A parent in our house, a male parent who will remain nameless to protect them, may have allowed our 3-year-old son, Max, to stay up late the other night and watch movies. And then may have allowed him to get up super early and eat a bunch of Fruit Loops and watch more movies the next morning. Again, we're going to protect him. Stay nameless male parent, and then was dismayed and shocked when he turned into really a chimpanzee and became just this being that bounced off walls, used that male parent as a trampoline many times. Had to be told, we don't ride the dogs like small horses. They may love you, but they don't want to carry you around. And things like your little brother isn't supposed to bend that way, no matter how much you love him. He just doesn't do that. And so this parent, the exasperation built up. It was me, all right? Spoiler alert, it was me. Anyways, and so, the moment came where we're training Max to use the potty. We're potty training him, and so he's in training pants, which aren't quite diapers, but aren't quite chonies is what we call them. And so they're the in-betweens, because you're training him to pee in the potty, not his pants. And so we've explained this to him and said, if you have to go to the bathroom, come let us know, and we'll take care of it. And so after, the chimpanzee morning, there just became this moment where you hear him, I'm wet. it's dripping. And being the parent who had no energy fueled by Fruit Loops that morning and had stayed up late and got up early with him, but didn't really like the movies, it reached that breaking point, that moment where all of us parents get to that point where I don't know if I can handle this anymore. And I picked him up and took him into the bathroom and took off his wet clothes and put him on the potty and held this drenched training diaper, which is never, you sit there and you say, it's a training pant, son. You train in them. And it just became this level of exasperation where I know every single one of us who have children or grandchildren or even pets have done this, where you stand there and you don't mean to do it, but in front of them you just say, ah! The exasperated parent groan. We've all done that. And then I looked down and I realized how my son was experiencing that moment, and he was looking up at me and he began to weep. He began to cry. And I felt terrible because in that moment I was simply groaning and saying, I just need 5 minutes I need to be away from you for 5 minutes. And he was starting, can Dad handle me? Can you handle me? Do I need to wrap this up? Do I need to fix this before Dad is truly going to be able to handle me? And it broke my heart, and I realized that's how oftentimes we approach God. Where we have this gut feeling that he's up there. When we make this one mistake, he's doing that exasperated parent groan, saying, I just need 5 minutes without you. I can't handle you right now. And really, the beauty of this series is to discover that our baggage is not stuff that God handles or doesn't handle. It's actually necessary. And when we view it in the right way, that baggage, those fears, those anxieties, those disappointments, those doubts, those desires, they become things that are necessary for us to have a healthy and meaningful relationship with God and with others. And so our prayer and hope for you these next 4 weeks is simply that you realize the true beauty and invitation to come as you are.
Debbie, could you pass me the creamer, please?
Did you read that Wall Street article I mailed you?
Oh, yeah, Dad, thanks. It was a good read. Can't my boss see that I have so much more to offer? They're going to want to hire a new young guy fresh out of college. What if I get caught this time around? What else would I do?
John, what would you think about heading up to the mountains this weekend before your dad goes back to Chicago?
Yeah, sounds great. They're going to let me go this time. I won't hear the end of it from her. Then I won't be able to send Carl to school. I'll have to ask Dad for help, and he'll see a son who can't cut it in the real world. Well, I better go. Got an early morning meeting.
That's my boy. The early bird gets the worm.
Bye, Dad.
Go get him, son. Am I just an irrelevant old man to him? Does he even need my advice? Should I have even come down to visit? If I disappeared today, would it even matter?
Well, I'm glad you're here, Grandpa.
Me too, kiddo. I'll just keep coming to visit, and eventually they'll put me in the corner of the room like an old relic or something.
So, are you ready for your first day back at school today?
Yep.
Great. I think it's going to be a really good semester for you.
Am I ever going to understand Mr. Peters' stupid class? And this homework? Just stupid. If Mr. Peters keeps assigning so much homework, I'm going to die. Or be in his class forever.
Oh, Carl. I saw Samantha and her mom at the mall yesterday.
What? Mom? I can't believe you. You didn't say anything, did you? You know what? I'm gonna be late right now. I gotta go. Bye.
Love you, honey. I probably shouldn't have said that. Maybe I haven't given him enough space. Is he ever going to make it on his own? What if he stays home forever? He could be dependent on us for the rest of our lives.
You know, anxiety is like a runaway train inside of your mind, isn't it? You start thinking about something and going through the worst case scenarios. The next thing you know, it just like dominates all your thoughts, and you're at some place that you dread, and you start to experience all the symptoms of as if it had already occurred. And that's just kind of the nature of anxiety. You know, studies have shown that it is a very, very small percentage of the things that we have great anxiety over ever come about. But we get to experience them when we, have anxiety and go over them. This past week or whatever, right after Christmas, I woke up in the morning and my tooth over on this side had kind of this weird tingly feeling to it. And I was like, oh man, I hope something's not going wrong with my tooth. Next thing I know, it's like hurting a little bit, and then I'm like fooling with it, and every time I bite something hard, I'm just going like this, and then I'm like, yeah, it's hurting, man, it's hurting now. Probably because I was messing with it so much. And then as it started to hurt, and we got together with family, and then I noticed it again, I'm thinking, this tooth has gone bad, and it's like we're between Christmas and New Year's, and my dentist is probably not in the office, and if this thing goes bad, I'm like, I can't go to the dentist, and oh man, it's like gonna need a root canal or something. It's like gonna be infected, and by the new year, and then and then the insurance thing's gonna be all crazy. I'm just sure because it's new. And next thing you know, I'm like, it's just dominating everything, and my tooth is fine right now. It all went away. I was back talking to Seth earlier, and I was like, man, my back is hurting, and I just hope it's not my kidneys. And I'm like, Seth, and I had this tooth thing. I hope I'm not becoming like a hypochondriac or something. And then he goes, no, you're just getting old. That's what happens, dude. Yeah. Anxiety, the thing with anxiety that is so dreadful is that it has a way of dominating us. It has a way of just covering us in this sense of gloom and doom that's just kind of generic but pervasive, and it spills over to everything in our lives. Anxiety is also, it's not just a mental thing. It's not just a feeling or an emotion you have. Anxiety affects your body as well. And so one of the problems we have is that anxiety can have this way of getting a hold of you and just dominating your life, dragging you all over the place and stealing and robbing some of the great joys and the things that God has before you. So here's my hope for this morning, just really simple, is that maybe in some way you could come out of this morning and see that the Bible has something to say that would give you a new way to think about anxiety, okay? And to do it in a way that would actually open you up to the idea and the experience that your anxiety can actually be a good thing. In fact, that at moments there's something God can do through your anxiety. Not that he will magically make it go away, because that's like not human, not realistic, but that will open you up to a new kind of wisdom and freedom in your life that actually becomes a good thing, that doesn't drag you around and pull you down and dominate your life. That's what I want you to get out of this morning here. Now, as we get to this, I want to make just a couple of observations before I get into our text and unfold all this. And the first observation is this, and you probably already know this, but just I want to state it. Anxiety is just unavoidable in this world, okay? To be human is to experience anxiety of some level or another on some frequent basis. And the reason is this: we're just finite beings. Okay, we're mortal, we live in a world that is big and powerful and is way beyond all that we can control, which means there are going to be things that can affect our lives that we just don't have full control over. And that's going to create anxiety, like your own teeth, okay? Your own teeth. You don't have all the control over your own teeth that you would like to have. And it's going to produce anxiety. For instance, my dentist, I love the guy dearly, but he's at this place where he's like, we need to start replacing your fillings. And it just produces anxiety in me to think we got to replace my fillings. When I got those fillings many, many years ago, no one ever told me that fillings have to be replaced. And now those of you who are younger than me, you're freaking out right now because you're like, what? Fillings need to be replaced? Yes. See, anxiety is unavoidable in this world. Now, here's the other thing, the other observation that I want to make in this is that anxiety is complex. And what I mean by this is that anxiety, there is a very physical component to it. There is a mental, emotional component to it, and there's a spiritual component to it. I had the opportunity to talk with a friend, an elder of our church earlier this week. It's Dr. Griffin, and one of the areas he specializes in is with brain chemistry and mood issues, and understands so much of this. And just talking with him about this, he said, what people really need, especially when they struggle deeply with anxiety, is to understand it's something that affects us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that you need all of those components in there. Anxiety, in some sense, is a good thing. Part of how God created us is right? If a bear is chasing you, anxiety is your best friend, okay? Because it's going to pump adrenaline into your system. There will be steroids released in your body. Your acuity and focus gets really, really good. Good things happen in that moment. But here's the complexity of it. Your body can go into that mode when you don't need it to. And then it does bad things to your heart. It can lead to diabetes. It can keep you up. It can keep you from sleeping. And we all know, right? Sleep's a very good thing. And I say all of this with this observation for this reason. Okay, here's the main point for making this observation is this. I know that there are some of you here who struggle with anxiety in deep ways. I don't want you to come away from this message, because what I want to talk about in this message is primarily the spiritual side of this, okay? But don't take this message as the only way to treat or work with anxiety in your life. If anxiety becomes chronic in your life, don't over-spiritualize it. Don't say, if I just pray more, if I just read the Bible more, if I'm just a good Christian, then anxiety goes away. If you're struggling with anxiety, see your doctor. See a counselor. It's complex, and sometimes getting a hold of something like anxiety takes all of those approaches to get it in a good place, okay? So just making that observation, because I don't want anyone walking out of here and thinking that because that happens in Christian circles all too often with things like anxiety or depression or other issues. Get help. God wants you to get help and to work with that. Okay, so let me talk here about the spiritual side of anxiety and what we experience in all this. And to do that, what I want to do is go to a passage in Scripture that we've all heard about. It is this moment where the disciples go out on this boat on the Sea of Galilee. They get caught in this storm. This is found in Matthew 14, if you want to go ahead and turn there. And in the midst of this storm, Jesus walks on the water out to them. And there's this great encounter that takes place. And the reality is, this is a story filled with anxiety here. And we're going to watch as Jesus navigates this in a way that I hope that you come away from this and go, you know what? There's something that I can do, something that's happening in my life that will help me experience both wisdom and freedom in fresh new ways in my life here. So flip with me over to Matthew chapter 14. And this is, the story occurs late in the day. Jesus has been ministering all day long, and now kind of this transitional moment here that's going to set up this important story. Look at verse 23. Here it is. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And so you get this picture of they've finished this thing. Jesus actually, in the Greek, compels them to get into the boat and goes off while he dismisses the crowds. And then verse 23, after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, again, far, far away out on the Sea of Galilee, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. And what has happened here is this storm has whipped up on the Sea of Galilee. And now it is tossing this little boat around. And you can just imagine the disciples, most of whom were fishermen and sailors. They understood the danger that they were in. They understood that the boat they were in wasn't made for storms like this. And this idea of the waves are buffeting it is that the wind and the waves now are exerting more control over the boat than the disciples are. This is out of control, right? And that's when we feel anxiety. When we feel like we lose control over things that matter to us, that's when anxiety begins to kick in, and all the fears and we've all felt that. You can feel it in your body. We talk about, I've got butterflies in my stomach, which seems like a weird description of your stomach is bothering you, but that's an old saying, right? And so the disciples are in the midst of this. And here's the thing that I find interesting in the story is that Jesus had to have known that this storm was coming up. And yet the text is really clear. It is by Jesus' direction that he puts them in the boat and sails them off, knowing that they're going to face this storm. I don't know about you, but you ever have a moment you just go, man, that was not very nice, Jesus. Why didn't you say, wait till later? Why don't you walk around the lake tonight or something like that? There's a kind of intentionality with this. And you realize there are moments when Jesus is ministering to people, like what happens just earlier in the story. Earlier in the day, Jesus comes to this crowd of people and he sees them in all the torment, all the struggles that they're going with. He sees them as they're being dominated by religious leaders that are beating them down. He sees them that are people that are, many of them struggling financially, struggling for food. And the text, and you can read this on your in verse 14, same chapter. It says, Jesus looked at them and had compassion on them. And then he begins to heal them and feeds them. And he calms the storm in their life and just ministers to them. And yet, it's just a few verses later, the disciples are now going to be caught in a real storm. And he doesn't minister to them in the same way. It's just like, what's going on here? But yeah, here's what I want you to get from what's happening here. The most important thing that God's wanting to do in your life and my life is not calm the storms or fix the troubles or the hard things in our lives. There are more important things to God in our lives than just fixing storms and making life easier for us. See, here's the reality of what's happening. The anxiety and the fears and the storm that they're in, that anxiety is their ticket to growth. Anxiety can be your ticket to growth, friends. And if you can begin to see that sometimes that which produces anxiety in our lives can actually be an opportunity for growth, it begins to put you in a very different spot. Because what they're going to go through is going to give them eyes to see things about God and about themselves that they could never otherwise see. When you face challenges in life, those challenges by nature cause you to look and search and dig deep, to be willing to recognize things in your own heart that you'd never otherwise be willing to look at. And so sometimes those storms, the things that create anxiety in our lives, they're actually really good for us because they cause us to look deeper inside of us. And so Jesus compels them to get in that boat and sail off into what he knows is going to be a storm. Because to Jesus, this is a great opportunity to grow them into more and more of who he has created them to be. And the same is true of our lives. Look back at the story. So the storm comes up, starts buffeting the boat. You can just feel the anxiety and the terror that they begin to feel. Look at verse 25 here, and it says this: during the fourth watch of the night. So they've been fighting this storm all night long. We're getting into the early but still dark hours of the morning here. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. There is just a little miracle there. Walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, and you got to picture this the very first time this ever happens, walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. And now they're really freaking out. They're exhausted. They are worn out. They've been fighting this storm all night. And you can imagine during the whole night, I bet they were saying a few prayers like, Jesus, calm the ocean. God, where are you? Why didn't Jesus get into the boat with us? Yeah, where's he when this is all going down? And now they're going through this whole thing. And now there's some ghostly figure that comes walking out on the water toward them. And, there's a part we can get, this is just like terrifying. And it's like now they kind of go into, I don't know that it was like a full-blown panic attack, but maybe somewhere in that neighborhood of what's going on here in this moment. And when things like that happen to us in life, the thing that we always go to, right, is that we want to get out of that moment no matter what. Our prayers are always, God, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. And I'm sure that they were praying for that. And oftentimes, we carry this idea, right, that if God shows up in those moments that there's the storm in our life, what does it mean for God to show up? That the storm gets calmed. Oh yeah, I know God showed up because my problems went away. My health got better, my tooth got better. God showed up, my finances got better. My job, my boss changed his mind about the deadline on that project. Or, the professor didn't show up on exam day. I know there's a God now, But have you ever thought or considered that maybe in the midst of that storm, when you were praying for God to come, that he was already there? In the midst of this storm, Jesus shows, I love that about you. He shows up in this storm. But when he shows up, he doesn't come fixing the storm. At least not yet. What's interesting in the story is, when does Jesus finally calm the storm? At the very end of the story, okay? Sometimes Jesus shows up in our life and he heals or fixes or calms that storm right away. Oh, those are nice moments, aren't they? But other times, God comes and he is in the midst of the storm. And he's not going to calm the storm, not anytime soon, because there's something else that he is about in our lives. And the key thing in those moments for us, when we have prayed and prayed, God, just fix it. God, aren't you here? God, just tell me what to do. How many times have you prayed that? Oh, God, just tell me what to do and I'll just do it. And we forget to consider maybe God already has. maybe God's already there. And the great temptation that we always have in those moments is what? It's to run. It is to get out of Dodge. It is to say, I'm sure that there were some of the disciples in that moment that wanted to jump on the oars and just say, let's just row in the opposite direction of the ghostly guy that's walking on the water towards us. In those moments where you're struggling, maybe it's in a relationship and you want to just run. Maybe it's something at work. And the only thing you can think of is, I just need to get away from the pain or the scary thing as fast as I can. But sometimes, friends, that is the worst thing in the world you can do. A couple years ago, when we first got our dog Mal, he's this German Shepherd, this wonderful dog, and my daughter Colette fell in love with Mal, and they became the best of buds. And my daughter loves to watch Caesar's show, The Dog Whisperer. Have y'all seen this show? She watches this thing all the time. She's now watching all the reruns on this thing. If you need your dog trained, bring her by. My daughter can work miracles with her. And of course, this thing that Caesar loves to do to get dogs to exercise and stuff is he goes like roller skating or rollerblading with them. Well, my daughter loves to go roller skating. That is one of her things. In fact, her and my dad, that is like her and her granddad, that's one of the things that they do is they go roller skating together. And so one afternoon, I thought, I've got the perfect solution here. Coley, you need to take Mal roller skating around the neighborhood. He'll get some exercise. You'll get to roller skate. This will be great. But Mal, we had just gotten Mal, and he had run off once or twice, and so I had this fear, this anxiety that she's going to go roller skating around the neighborhood, and he's going to lunge and break loose from the leash, and we're going to lose Mal. And so I had this great idea. I said, hon, there's this way I can hook the leash to your hand, and if, there's the loop at the end of the. I already know where this is going. There's the loop at the end of the leash, and if you tuck the leash back through the loop, it makes like a slip knot. And I said, you just stick your hand right through there and just cinch that thing up and grab it. And then, if it slips out of your hand, it's still hooked, and Mal won't get away. Okay. Problem is, that really wasn't the problem I was wanting to solve. I thought it was, but it really wasn't, because they're standing in the driveway, and she's like, "Okay, Mal, let's go." And the second she starts to roller skate down our concrete driveway, her roller skates start to make this low growl sound. It's like, well, Mal hears that, and it spooks him a little bit. And of course, he's tethered to my daughter, and so this low growling noise seems to be following him down the driveway. And as it does, it makes him kind of scared, and he runs a little bit faster, and all of a sudden, Coley's like, and they get to the end of the driveway, and they go from the concrete to the asphalt, and asphalt's a lot rougher, and that low-grade growl, of the wheels on the concrete hits the asphalt, and now it goes, and Mal's like, and I was like something out of a cartoon, and then I start to scream, right? Mal, stop! And now Coley's screaming, and now this poor dog has this growling monster chasing him down while people are yelling at him, and no matter how fast he goes, we're hanging with him. And so I'm running down the cul-de-sac, and my daughter's screaming, and the dog's just going faster. And the thing is, the faster he goes, the more trouble it's causing in this whole thing. This really happened. And now, the end of our little cul-de-sac ends in a street, and all I can think of is, a car's going to come by, and the dog's there, and, it's going to be this big crash. So now I'm really screaming, freaking out. And as I freak out more and more, Mal freaks out, he takes off. My daughter had the presence of mind. There's like a little stop sign at the end of our cul-de-sac that no one's used until this moment. And my daughter, this was smart thinking. She's screaming down the street there, gets to the stop sign, and leaps over to the side so that she goes on one side of the stop sign while Mal's screaming down the road on the other side. And I'm watching this whole thing transpire as they both go, bam, slam it up, It was not my best parenting moment, as I realized for a whole other sermon, solve the right problem. The problem was not keeping my daughter attached to the dog. The problem was just, how can my daughter unattach from the leash? That was the problem I need to solve. But here's the thing. Sometimes when we run, we only make it worse. Sometimes when we run from those anxieties in our lives, what we really end up doing is just empowering them more and more and more. Because there's something about those anxieties, right, that fuel us. Think about anxiety. It doesn't make you sleepy and tired, does it? It amps you up. It keeps you up at night. It causes your mind to be dominated by those questions and those thoughts, and it takes us to those worst case scenarios. And the thing that we need to not do in those moments is try to run from them. See, we're going to have anxieties over our marriages. There's going to be moments where maybe your past comes to haunt you a little bit. Maybe you had a terrible relationship with your parents and you felt rejected or hurt. And now you see something happening in your marriage and you're afraid that that rejection or that hurt's going to play out in your marriage. And the thought of being rejected terrifies you. And out of the anxiety of what might happen, you begin to run. And the last place you want to run is away from that relationship because you think you might get hurt there. Or you begin to run in your job. You begin to avoid the things that you need to face. Maybe there's some conversation that's going to be a really difficult conversation filled with conflict because you need to say some hard things at work or at school or with a friend or someone, and you avoid it because it's this idea, I can't take the conflict, I can't take the rejection, I need the approval. Or what, my world will just crumble if this person gets mad at me or blows up or takes action or something. And you become the person who avoids and avoids and avoids because of the anxiety and the fears that all well up inside. And maybe you find yourself running. And it seems like, if I just run over here and I get away from it, it'll all be better. But have you noticed this? As you run away from those problems, it's never far enough, is it? And you run a little further. And you run a little further. And it's not long before you're in a marriage that lacks all intimacy and joy. It's not long before you find yourself in a job where you're frustrated constantly because you feel like you're the whipping boy or the whipping girl, but the reality is you're the one that is compromised and gave in and appeased again and again and again to avoid the conflict. But you know what? If you get into a peace at all costs, eventually, there's never enough peace that you can make to make it all okay. It can happen with parenting. It can happen with your image. We all have fears. And if we run from them, it never ends well. All we do is empower them. And what I love about Peter in this moment is how he responds to all of this. Look back at the passage here. Look at verse 28. Here's how he responds. Everyone is terrified. They're crying out. This is chaos on this little boat. And here's what Peter says. He looks out at Jesus. He says, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. And suddenly, Peter is the one who's asking the question. If it's you, tell me to come. If it's you, tell me to come. Ask me to come out there. And he begins to ask the question, right? And I think when we face those moments of great anxiety, when we face those moments where we're just like, I'm scared of what's happening in my marriage. I'm scared of what's happening with my kids. I'm afraid that I'm going to be that person that is going to grow old and become lonely. I'm the person that I'm afraid that if I make the wrong move at work, I'll lose my job, I'll become destitute, no one will ever hire me again, my whole world is going to fall apart. But at those moments, those are the times not to run, but begin asking the questions. God, are you in this? Is that you? Because those are the moments that you can begin to ask God, What is it that I need to see in this moment? Are you doing something in my life? And I love this about Peter, because Peter, instead of, jumping on the oars and trying to get away as fast as he can or doing it, he faces it. And the most important thing, well, I'll tell the two most important things we do, and I'll tell you what the other one is in a moment. Now, the first most important thing that we can do when we face those with anxieties is to face them and not to run from them. And the way we face them is to begin asking hard questions about them. What does this reveal about me? What does this say? What is God doing? And let me say this too, this becomes really important. When you are struggling with anxieties, you've got to move your anxieties into fears, okay? You need to move from anxiety to fear. And here's what I mean by that, because you're probably going, what? That doesn't sound like a very good plan at all to me, Glenn. Here's what I mean by this. Think of anxiety as the general sense of feeling and gloom that is undefined. That is the thing that we experience in our emotions, our bodies, our minds, and it's just this bleh. Think of fear in this way. Fears are the specific things that we worry about going wrong. And if you can move from the general feelings of just, oh, my world's gonna, it's gonna be all over, and it's just, to, what I'm really afraid of? I'm afraid, right, of going to the dentist. I'm afraid that I'm going to be rejected if I'm honest with my coworker. I'm afraid that if I'm honest with my spouse, he or she will leave me. I'm afraid of what it would mean to venture out into that thing that I think God is calling me to in career or ministry or building a new relationship with a neighbor or a friend. What if it goes bad? And if you can begin to identify the specific things that you're really afraid of, it's amazing how much power you'll begin to have over it. Because you can begin to look at those things and you can begin to say this, you know what? If so-and-so at work rejects me and gets mad at me, that's what I'm afraid of. You know what? I'll make it through that. God's on my side. I'll make it through that. It's really not the end of the world. You know what? If it creates conflict in my marriage, we can make it through that. We can talk. I can be honest, and it may mean something that's hard or difficult, but I can make it through that. And suddenly, it's not dragging you into worst case scenarios. It's beginning to show you where God can actually walk you through some of the things that you're most afraid of. Ask the questions. See, this is where you can become wise about yourself and what God's calling you to. Ask the questions. God, are you already in this? And what do you want me to know about myself? And what is it that you're asking me to do? Right? Jesus says to Peter, it is me. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to come out on the water. And this leads to the second thing that we've got to do anytime we face anxiety. This is the other very, very important thing. And Jesus actually tells all of them what to do. And it's Peter that responds in this way. Look back at verse 27. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And here's the thing we have to do when we face those fears and anxieties in our life, and it's this: take courage. You have to take courage. Now, here's what I mean by take courage, okay? Let me define courage in this way. Courage is the strength that comes from simply realizing that some things are more important than what we fear most. Let me say that again. Courage is simply the strength that we get when we realize that there are things in life that are more important than what we fear most. When you can say, having a marriage that is intimate and authentic and true, that is more important than avoiding conflict in my marriage, then suddenly you have the courage to be a spouse that you want to be. Maybe for some of you, God has been calling you into a different career. Maybe God has been saying to you, I have made you, I have built you, I am calling you, summoning you into a new kind of career where I have things for you, things that are going to help bring my kingdom into this world. And you look at that and you say, oh my gosh, I can't do that. You know, I've got this secure job now, and I've always been terrified of this notion of being financially unstable, and this is the secure job. I hate this job. This job is against everything that I am, but I don't want to risk going out there. Or maybe you're looking at something and you're saying, you know what, to take that class in school, that's going to be a hard class. And even though that would kind of begin to prepare me in a direction for where I want to go or to get this degree, that's too risky. I'm going to play it safe in this moment. Courage is the moment that you begin to say, I fear failure, I feel rejection, I fear loneliness, but there are things in this world that are more important than my fear of those things. And it is following God's call. Courage is when you know God is calling you into that career and you say, while I fear what it would mean to make this kind of switch in my life, I know that is what God has made me for. And you know what? There's real risk in those things. To take courage isn't a magical formula for making it work. There are real risks out there, right? Picture Peter in that moment, right? He climbs out of the boat. Can you imagine that moment? The boat's rolling around. Peter's like, okay, Jesus just called me out there. And you hear all the other disciples going, glad I didn't ask the question, because then he would have asked me out there. And just, and maybe even Peter's going, okay. But he takes courage. And in that moment, what he's saying is, my fear of getting out of this boat, my fear of this storm, isn't as important as what it would mean to have this moment of actually trusting what Jesus is saying. This is my moment to not just give lip service to following Christ. In this moment, this is where I actually act in a way of faith against what I fear most in this moment, to say, I am a follower of this man Jesus, and I'm going to step out. And Peter is the one that gets to experience that moment. But make no mistake about it, he goes out there in that moment. It is a great moment, right? And then he slips a little, right? Then there's this moment where he sinks, right? And the beauty of that is both that in his failure in that moment, he gets to see that even in the failure, he gets to experience the rescuing of God in that moment. And that faith and that rescue is something that 11 other guys in the boat never get to experience. Don't be a follower of Christ who only watches what faith can really be around you. Be the person who lives it. And friends, I'm telling you, there are things that God is calling you to in this world that are amazing. I'm going to close with this thought. I was thinking about this morning, and maybe one of the best examples that I've gotten of this, of someone else who's inspired me, is my wife. Like three or 4 years ago, God really started to kind of call her in this direction of forensic psychology, which at first, most people go, so what is that? That sounds like, and it's dealing with the worst in our population, serial murders and killers and crazy people, and so many people are like, are you tall enough to do that? Because these seem like violent people. And to do that, she started looking at that. That was a scary prospect. She had not been back in school in well over a decade, and the education for this process is not a easy thing. Okay, there are many degrees that are far easier than this, and going back and getting that degree came at great risk and great cost in so many ways. She had to navigate this thing. Okay, how am I going to be a mom and raise 2 kids and work on this degree and figure out this whole thing and get into it, get the experience and internship and this whole thing? And I watched her step into that with great courage, that all the things that seemed so fearful, in the end, she said, aren't as important as the fact that God has made and called me to do this in this world. This is part of what I contribute to this world. And she stepped into that. And about a little less than a year into it, the degree she was working on, the university she was working with, she found out didn't have enough of the clinical side to qualify for what she would need later for her PhD. And she had to start over on her master's. And a moment where it's just so disheartening, a moment where you just say, just run, give up. You know, you get credit for trying. You just, she started over on her master's and said, I don't give up. And it was just inspiring to have someone in my life step out of the boat and say, I don't know how I'm going to do all of this in this moment, but it starts with having the courage to just get out of the boat. It starts with the courage to say, I will have the hard conversation. I'll be vulnerable in my marriage. I'll switch careers. I'll find the ministry that God is calling me into. See? Friends, what fear do you struggle with? And my challenge to you is, take courage. What is it in this world that is more important than that fear? And that's your homework. Go act on what's more important than that fear. And suddenly, that fear becomes a much smaller thing. Why don't you stand for a closing prayer here? And again, as we close here this morning,